C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être ici aujourd'hui, cette heureuse invitation. Merci beaucoup. Je commence pour dire, selon Umberto Eco, que la langue d'Europe, c'est la traduction. Donc, je pense qu'on peut parler un petit peu français et anglais. C'est bon pour moi. Et je m'excuse pour non faire les conférences entièrement en français. Excuse-moi. C'est un plaisir, comme on dit. As mentioned, I will talk about the relationship about art and law, les relations, l'ingrédient entre droit et art. And I begin with a quotation of American constitutional lawyer Charles Allen Wright, who said, "The only tool of the lawyers is words. We have no marvelous pills to prescribe for our patients. Whether we try a case, writing a brief, drafting a contract, or negotiating with an adversary, words are the only thing we have to work with." Is that true? The only thing that lawyers have to work are the words? I'm sure it's not. We have a number of examples, old and recent, new and old, that art and law, paintings, drawings, etc., have a long relationship with law, the droit, the jurisprudence. Some of these examples, we have articles, concepts, etc. For example, an old German book about the law on colors, written by Hermann Wiesmann under the direction, the supervision of Christian Thomasius, one of the greatest civil lawyers of the history. We have also this wonderful book by Jacques Baudel, La justice et ses robes, the dresses of justice. We have also this concept of the Roman law, elegantia iuris, an old Roman concept that deals with beauty and law. La beauté du droit, a very interesting book about law and beauty. Also, this one, Le symbolisme juridique de la chaussure, et un article de Anthropology of Law, et this old book of Chassin, de la symbolique du droit. All of these texts, all of these books, all of these concepts deals with something different of words in the legal field, in the legal arena. So why Mr. Charles Allen Wright said that the only thing we lawyers have is words, and why we have a huge amount of doctrine about these different things, art, colors, drawings, etc. Because art, during a great period of time, art have been multimedia. Although art law is a relatively young term, in the legal vocabulary, the dialogue between art and law is very old. The dialogue between art and law remounts going back in the legal antiquity. We have this very interesting draw of jurisprudence of lady justice playing like a guitar, a violin. So where the scales are here, the sword laying down here. Just to mention just a small example that sometimes we can go beyond words to speak about law. Okay? Another very interesting example is the King violoncello, the King cello, built by Andrea Amati in Cremona in 1538. You have here drawing, a painting of Lady Justice in the body of the cello. Why someone puts a Lady Justice, scales and sword here in the violoncello? Why? Of course, because law is not only words. And I begin with this. We have many differences alongside the history. We have many different examples of art and law dialoguing along the history. We have here the declaration of the droit des hommes. We have another completely completely different style. Gustav Klimt, jurisprudence, la science du droit, jurisprudence or philosophy of law. We have some justice goddess upside. We have here other criminal here. This painting was painted in the law faculty of Wien and destroyed by the Nazis during the Second World War. This is also a jurisprudence painted by Edvard Munch, jurisprudence, and this is very interesting because we have here the 3 steps of the legal thinking, the 3 stages of the legal thinking. We have reading, we have thinking, and we have finally the surprise. The light here signalizes the good idea, the eureka, okay? Completely different from the other one. This is also a jurisprudence painted by, or concepted, or not painted, this is a sculpture and this is the painting by André Boucher, French, Swiss artist. And this structure, this diptycho, La Justice et Horizon, are in the German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe, in Bundesverfassungsgericht. It's interesting, the dialogue here with the colors of the French Revolution. We have le bleu, blanc, rouge of the French Revolution, and the justice moving in this structure of the, so to say, legal rule of law, the état de droit. If the justice goes beyond the état de droit, the rule of law, it will deformate the rule of law, the état de droit. Could be an interpretation. So we have paintings, we have drawings, we have sculptures of justice, but we have also installations of justice. This is a very well-known artist, legal artist, called Carey Young, that made this installation by entering in the zone created by this drawing, and for the period you remain there, you declare and agree that you are a citizen of the United States of America. Of course, it's not. It was concept installed in the Museum for Gegenwartskunst Zurich. So, is it possible? Is it possible to change the legal scenario with a work of art? This is another installation, very interesting. Oliver Beam-Zimmet took 2 walls, put the entire German civil code in those walls, and linked with this red line all the mentions of the paragraphs. The first article mentions the second part, the second article, then he linked it. So we have this installation, network of the German civil code. So sometimes it's possible to see how the law is beautiful. Is it possible? to sometimes it's possible to understand how law is built. And we have beyond drawings, paintings, installations made by artists, we have also sometimes works of art made by juries, the legal people, like Monsieur le Juge Pierre Cavela. Pierre Cavela was a French judge who, during the sessions, during the juries, during the audiences, are always painting, drawing something. And at the end of his life, we had some very interesting paintings and drawings from Monsieur le Juge Pierre Cavela. Why law is so multimedia during the time? In many occasions in history, law used symbols, images, to be disseminated and understood, especially in a long period when illiteracy was dominant and the press was inexistent, inaccessible and costly. In other words, during a large period of history, when most of the people didn't know how to read or to write, sometimes works of art, drawings and pieces of sculpture, etc., could be very, very useful to transmit a legal message. This is why during a large period of time, law was or has been multimedia. This kind of multimediality of law was put aside by the positivism, but now with the facilities of cell phones, the visuality in general, we can again recuperate this visuality, this multimediality of law. It's interesting to understand that, for example, Bartolo of Sansoferrato, one of the most important civilists of his time, one of the commentators of the Roman law, was beyond a legal expert, beyond a prestigious professor of civil law, private law. He was also an expert of genealogy and heraldry. And he wrote this very interesting book, De Insignis et Armis, one of the very first books on the colors of brasons, the drawing of brasons, insignias, etc. Is it clear for anyone? If you have doubts, if I'm going very fast, please interrupt me, no problem, okay? I have to say that for me it's especially interesting the fact that here Bartolo of Sansoferrato, it's almost with the eyes closed in this picture, because he was very interested in the depicting of images. He was very interested in colors, details, signs, position of hands, etc. Also another legal book, very interesting in the medieval times, was this, the Emblematum Liber, a book written by a lawyer, professor of law, called Andreas Alciatus, another private lawyer, another specialist in private law, in civil law, that wrote a book where you have for each concept a drawing. You have the drawing and the explanation of the drawing of this concept. For example, concepts like peace, war, contracts, justice, etc. So it's a kind of comics to explain such ideal, such a not concrete concept. Another lawyer, Andreas Alciatus, was a very famous lawyer. So, as I mentioned, during many examples in the medieval times, we had the text of the law, the text of the codification, the very first codifications, and some drawings explain what are in the words, what are in the text, so to say. So we have here, for example, the Sachsenspiegel, one of the very codifications of the German law. Sachsenspiegel, we can see here the text and how can we celebrate wedding, how can we make a contract, how can we make a donation, etc. Like comics nowadays, a mixing of text and drawings and paintings. This idea until today is very common. We have, for example, in the Indian Constitutional Court, the law tunes, the cartoons for law, where we explain, the Indian judge explain some legal concepts and translate it in the language of comics. We have here, I have just seen this morning in the bookshop, this French book, Les Arrêts Illustrés, with some decisions, some court cases translated into comics language. And we have this very interesting Brazilian example of the beginning of the 90s, where a professor, a very famous professor of law called Luiz Alberto Vará, translated into comics language the pure theory of law of Hans Kelsen. Os quadrinhos puros do direito. Quadrinhos is comics. Why do we use these tools called art and law? For a diverse range of reasons, motives. The rationales for use law and art tools are very, very broad. We have sometimes we use art and law just for aesthetics, to aggregate some beauty in law, which is not bad. We have sometimes just for critique, to criticize law. For example, in a newspaper cartoon, a newspaper dessin, satire. Teaching, of course, sometimes we aggregated drawings in a book. It's not only modern books, but also in medieval books we can see drawings like trees, charters, etc., just to make it more understandable. We use art and law tools to legitimate certain figures. It's obvious, for example, the case of Napoleon, who benefited himself from a huge amount of paintings, drawings, etc., in order to empower his government. We can use art and law tools as a soft power, and here I mention especially the case of cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy is a very interesting tool, or a very interesting fact to be studied nowadays. And finally, we can use art and law tools to enhance imagination, to enlarge creativity, and finally to achieve innovation. Every time we go to a exhibition, a museum, a gallery, we can activate imagination, activate creativity, and activate innovation. And why innovation is so important for us, the jurists, the legal persons, legal persons not, it's a joke of some colleagues. Why innovation is so important for us, because, of course, sometimes we don't have in the legal system answers. Of course, the law is always one step before the society. Of course, if, or better, the legal system, the positive system in law is sometimes not complete in order to offer all the answers we need. And in this case, in those cases, we need innovation, creativity, and imagination to offer some answers to solve problems, to create new decisions, before the legislator can offer a rule of law, a piece of law for the society. Is it clear? Yeah? So, this is the reasons why we can use art and law examples. I move now for the specific field, for the specific arena of the international law. The field where Professor Sandrine Maljeune-Bois is interested. Why, or better, in what sense international law relates to works of art? I begin this part of the presentation with a quotation of with this professor of international law, Jean d'Aspremont. The search for aesthetics is thus part of the daily work of international lawyers. And this very interesting book of a Canadian professor of law, The Aesthetics of International Law. The quest, the preoccupation, the worry about aesthetics, beauty in international law is very present in the day-to-day activity of professors, international judges, international lawyers. In what sense? In what sense? During the history, we had many examples, many periods of time where international law, the great treaties, the great events of international law were depicted by painters, artists, in order to preserve those facts. We had this example, very old, very traditional, of the swearing of the oath of ratification of the Treaty of Münster, painted by Gerhard Terborch in 1648, at the end of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, I'm sure you know, it was the very first time where the concept of sovereign, the concept of sovereign states was developed. And we have here a sort of translation for images of the same concept. For the first time, we have a painting showing the end of a war without winners and defeated delegations. There is no evidence here of who won and who lost the war. The central arena of the painting is occupied by the treaty itself here, and we have at the same time two delegations, the Netherlands delegation and the Spain delegation here, swearing the new treaty. And how can I say that we have here two different delegations? Basically, because Netherlands people, they are Protestant. They swore the treaty with the hands up, and the Spanish Christians, Catholics, swear with the hand over the Bible. We don't have here any distinction between it's impossible to say who is who. We have in the margins of the drawing, a small reference about the army and the church. This is the painter, a self-portrait. So it's impossible to say here that we don't have equal countries, equal states, a very objective painting. We could explain this fact either by saying that the painter was in favor of the reason of this sovereign state, or that it was painted just to double the chance to sell the painting for each side of the treaty. It's possible also. I mentioned a few minutes ago the soft power of cultural diplomacy, the art in international law, and we have here an example of this soft power, the painting Peace and War by the Brazilian painter Cândido Portinari. It was a gift donated by the Brazilian government for the United Nations headquarters in New York. We have this aesthetic preoccupation of international lawyers in such schemes like that. This is an international trade network conceived by Miguel Centeno and Abigail Cook that won a prize for beauty in research. It's not only a very interesting. You have here the countries and the trade agreements with those countries, Indonesia, Japan, India, etc. But it's without any doubt a beautiful image, a beautiful drawing depicting figure. This relationship between international law and art was underlined, especially some years ago, was recuperated some years ago, when the European Society of International Law in 2014 decided for the first time to organize a conference about international law and 3 points. And we had a kind of series of panels, academic discussions about topics like international law and photography, international law and cinema, international law and art. For the first time, it was incorporated at the academic agenda of the very prestigious European Society of International Law. Since that, we have like an explosion of bookings about international law and themes like that. For example, this here, humanitarian photography. How important are photographies to improve the humanitarian law, the international law of wars, refugees, etc. And this year we have this very interesting book, International Law's Objects, a history of international law objects. Objects like passports, covers of international law books, etc. The book tells us the history of international law from the point of view some specific objects of the international law, international relations. Also, in the field of international, in the European Society of International Law, we have here the very traditional, very important European Journal of International Law, who presents in each edition the last pages this roaming charge session. Roaming charge is a session dedicated to photography in international law. Sometimes we have professors, PhD students, researchers who present his own photographies, pictures, in order to translate into images concepts of international law. Like this here, we have the window of McDonald's in front of the Cathedral of Milan, Milan Cathedral, Duomo di Milano. And we have two cathedrals, one in front of the other, the Cathedral of Caution and the Cathedral of Faith. Every edition they have another picture. And we have also this kind of study. We have two different studies here. Professor Jorge Galindo, do you know Galindo, from University of Brasilia, and Professor Jean Daspremont here. They supervised two monographies, very interesting, about the book covers in international law. In Brazil and in England, they presented this, they supervised these monographies, saying what along the history changed in the book covers of international law books. What are the most mentioned painters? What those mentors, more classic, more vanguard, what they could tell us about conceptions of international law. Okay? We had also this very interesting debate. This is one of the most important manuals of international law, the Cambridge Manual of International Law, written by James Crawford and Marty Koskeniemi. Those professors, before launching the book, they debated in the blog of Cambridge University Press how would be the best picture for the cover of the book. If you photograph, if you go in this QR code with your cell phones, you can follow the debate. Professor Crawford and Professor Koskeniemi dialoguing among them, between them, about what would be the best picture for the cover. It's a very interesting, very creative dialogue, and they decided that the best picture would be a Red Cross train passing a village, the Gino Severini. Why? They decided, you can see in the dialogue. The importance, how helpful is art, works of art, drawings, etc. for international law, gained another importance with the called legal design. Legal design is a mix of design, law and technology that helps international law to be even more understandable for refugees, foreigners, etc. We have nowadays a solid school of international legal design, the Legal Design Laboratory in Stanford, in the Stanford University, and they, mixing design, law and technology, they make things like that placard with some essential rights while you are in a detention center. You can imagine, for example, that sometimes people in a detention center doesn't speak any language and can clearly know, seeing this placard, that they have right to food, to clean clothing, to soaps, etc., to be aware about the rights they have. This new development called legal design we can see in a diverse number of countries, and all of these professionals, all of these faculties of law, all these designers, they are linked in the Legal Design Alliance. Nowadays, the Legal Design Alliance develops a huge amount of initiatives, congress, publications, events about the deepen or the necessity to mix technology, design and lawyer in order to deepen legal information. Here in France, we have Image Droit, an initiative conducted by a lawyer and designer called Olivia Zarcate, who is a young professional. She is very smart in mixing these tools, legal and technological tools, in order to achieve more understandability. We have also the legal design assas. The legal design assas was a very interesting initiative. Nowadays they changed the name for legal innovation assas, and in order to also mix law, technology, and design to make law more understandable. All these initiatives. We have also this Sketchlet, another French initiative. All of these initiatives, they try to create legal symbols, legal icons to make the legal information easier. You can imagine, for example, when you make a contrat d'assurance, insurance contract, sometimes you have thousands and thousands of articles and clauses, etc. And sometimes for a person who are not well informed in the legal arena, in the legal field, sometimes it's very boring and difficult to understand all the clauses and the articles of the contract. So they try to create some legal icons or symbols to make easier the circulation of information. So all this mixing of information and design and technology and drawings and paintings make what Professor Rodolfo Sacco from the University of Turin calls il diritto muto, le droit muto, or the silent law. Pardon? Oui. Oui. Il diritto muto, the silent law, that this eloquent silence of the law, the part of law that even doesn't speak, says a lot. During a large period of time, in the medieval times and even before, sometimes law expresses itself through colors, sounds, rituals, gestures. This is what Professor Sacco calls the silent law, il diritto muto. This part of law that gained very prestige during hundreds of years, but since the positivism in the second part of the 19th century lost completely space in the legal scholars, legal academies, in legal life. We can say nowadays that nullum ius sine aesthetica. It's impossible to think law without a static side. Could someone read for me, please? Could you read, please, Professor? This part here.
Le droit et l'art doivent s'entraider, les petits joints les amoindrir. Il faut qu'il y ait un édifice commun, peu importe qu'il soit matériel ou intellectuel, à la fois parthénon, athénien et basilique justinienne, au fronton illuminé par cette devise, à la fois très juste et très beau.
Edmond Picard. Donc, since more than 100 years ago, Edmond Picard was recognizing this brotherhood between law and aesthetics, law and image, law and art. What I'm speaking, that Professor Sandrine mentioned at the beginning, who was Sandrine was telling us that it seems was so nouveauté, so new. It's not so new. It's not. It's in fact a very old theme, a very old topic. And why we have this possibility of interaction, dialogue, relationship between law and art? Because all of them, law and art, are part of culture for the beginning, just for the beginning. Law and art are manifestations of culture for the beginning. But furthermore, we have law and art dividing in an intersection of themes. First, the themes of law are the themes of art. Always. It's impossible to see a book, a piece, a play, a music, a roman that is written about anything that is not also in our lives and in law. Is it clear? Always the themes of art are the themes of law. Marriage, births, assassinations, debts, always the themes of art are the themes of law. Second, language. It's impossible to think about law and art without language. Law is a manifestation of language. Art is also a manifestation of language. Even the more abstract form of art, there's always the presence of in the language, even in form of a negation of language. But always law and art are languages. And if law and art are languages, they are also plenty of interpretation. It's impossible to think about law and art without interpretation. Law and art are always plenty of fictions. The legal person is a fiction. What are other fictions in the law field? We have many different. Another fiction, everybody knows the law. Of course, art is plenty of fiction. It's impossible to think about art without fiction. Law and art have always the intersection of improvisation and innovation. But attention here, when I speak about innovation and improvisation in law, innovation and improvisation here, they have the same sense of improvisation in the jazz. In the sense of, when I speak about improvisation, I'm not speaking of something made with less accuracy, something made with less how can I say, something make it fastly. No. Only the improvisation here in law and art has the sense that the only person who is capable of making improvisation is the artist or the lawyer who has the deep knowledge of the partiture and the music and the instrument he plays. It's only capable to make improvisation in jazz if you know perfectly the music and the saxophone. The same thing, a judge or a lawyer to innovate in law, a professor to innovate in law, he has to have a deep knowledge about the legal science. Is it clear? So As I mentioned some minutes ago, it's impossible to think about law without considering the incompletude of law. Okay? In this case, improvisation is fundamental. It's fundamental to complete the legal lacunas. And the last intersection between law and art is behavior. Law and art have a deep power to interfere in our behavior. So, law and art has the power to modify our behavior. In this sense, I would like to mention Claude Debussy quote saying that works of art make rules. Rules do not make works of art. Is that true? Is it possible that works of art make rules? Yes, it is possible. And we have here two small examples. One of them, Banksy, the famous graffiti artist, urban artist. He normally, Banksy, do this art attack. What is an art attack? He have in London we have some very pure, immaculated white walls, and at night Banksy puts something like this official announce. This wall is designated designated graffiti area. Please take your litter home. On the other day, you have the former white wall completely designed with graffitis and colors and etc. This is the appearance of the official authorization is sufficient to completely change the landscape, the paysage, the environment. And we have also this art attack that occurred in Rio de Janeiro. Some trains, urban trains in Rio de Janeiro, one day appeared with this placard. Em horários de pico, pode ser necessário que você deixe outras pessoas sentarem no seu colo. Sometimes in the rush hour, it's necessary that you permit that other people to sit your knees. It's a scandal in the urban, in the train company. How can one permit that other people sit in their knees in the rush hours? Of course, it was an art attack, but created an enormous scandal in the press. Of course, people sometimes decided not to permit, just because it seems a formal, a legal order by the enterprise of the urban trains. So we have here an example that works of art make rules. Works of art makes rules also because art has a physiological power to modify our behavior. We have here also two examples. The Síndrome de Stendhal. Síndrome de Stendhal was a disease detected by the doctors of the Florence Hospital that some tourists exposed to a huge amount of beautiful art, normally they had higher blood pressure, they had some fever, they had some headache, they have some symptoms that are typical from this disease called Síndrome de Stendhal. We have also the musicogenic epilepsy, a kind of epilepsy detected by some doctors in the United States that appears when you are exposed to some sounds, to some singers, to some music, and such music is causes certain convulsions, certain epilepsy in your brain. It's strange, but you have here two different examples of how art can biologically interfere in your body, in your mind, in your behavior. One of victims of this biological, biological body interferences of art was Professor Wassily Kandinsky. Wassily Kandinsky, before being a very famous artist, one of the creators of the abstract paintings, was a very famous private lawyer, a private law professor in the Russian academy, in the Russian law faculty. And once he was seeing a presentation of the Wagner Valkyrie, as far as I remember, and he had a sort of vision, a sort of ecstasy, and he decided to give up with the law profession, the law scholarship, and decided to go immediately to Germany to start a new career as a painter, just after this presentation of the Wagner Valkyrie. This year, Professor Kandinsky is celebrating, Kandinsky no, but the Bauhaus is celebrating 100 years. On the same reason, on the same aids of this relationship between art and law, we have here this decision of the United Nations Tribunal for Rwanda, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that 6 years ago he decided to condemn Simon Bikindi. Simon Bikindi was a musician, a sort of Michael Jackson Rwandese, from Rwanda, and he was also Minister for Culture in Rwanda. During the civil war in Rwanda, he makes some music incentivizing the violence or the civil war in Rwanda, and this was the leitmotif for the decision, 15 years imprisonment, according to the International Tribunal for Rwanda. This was equipared, this was committed an act like genocide. Simon Bikindi, just for composing those musics, was condemned to 15 years imprisonment for genocide. I would like to go now, just for a final few minutes, about more international law in the art, in a more hard law sense, in a positive sense now. We are talking, when we talk about the art market, we are talking about a $45 billion market. So this huge amount of money market, in fact, the art market is the third market in the world. Drugs, arms, and art market is targeted by a series of illicit conducts, and all of these illicit conducts are targeted by the art market because first, portability of the good, portability of the works of art serves as a payment method. You can just roll up a canvas and put it under your arms, and you can cross without any difficulty borders, countries, etc., and serve it as a payment method. Difficult of evaluation. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to evaluate a Picasso, evaluate a Cézanne. The prices can go up and down very, very fast. Market volatility. The circumstance that the works of art can range the price, the value. Almost universal interest of art. The regulation of the market. If you buy a house, a very normal, very common house. You have to register it. It's possible to follow all the previous owners of this house. It's not the same thing with works of art. Opacity and confidentiality of the works of this market. The art market is very opaque, it's very confidential. And we have finally the Robin Hood syndrome. Who cares about the theft of a millionaire's Picasso? Normally when we see in the newspapers, in the journal, in the TV, something about a Picasso was stolen in a millionaire's collection, nobody cares. This is the... So we have between crime in the art, theft, falsification, smuggling, looting, kidnapping of works of art, corruption, destruction of cultural heritage, terrorism, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, organized crime, and money laundering. In October last October, the European Parliament issued this report just on money laundering and tax evasion risks in free ports. What is a free port? A free port is a very important piece of this art market. A free port is an extremely secure storage facility offshore where valuable commodities, art, wine, gold, diamonds, can be kept with the utmost discretion and no one can enter without an appointment. We have free ports nowadays in places like Luxembourg, Switzerland, Geneva. The Geneva free port is very, very famous. Delaware in the States, Singapore. Free ports are places where you can put your Picasso, your collection of wines, etc. and where nobody knows that this collection, these works are there, normally without any tax payment. I would like just to finalize my presentation, going back to the first question I made. Quels sont les dialogues possibles? What are the relations, what are the dialogues possible to art and law? We have 5 dialogue possibles in the art law arena. We have l'art du droit, the art of law. The quantity of, as I mentioned here, drawings, sculptures, paintings, photographs, whose object is law, like justice, judgment, a scene of a courtroom scene, etc. We have le droit de l'art, the whole legal system involved in questions like the property of works of art, the copyrights of works of art, the law about auctions houses, the consumer law of art consumers, etc. The third, le droit comme art, the law as art. Here you have a huge number of authors. For the first time, in the first place, Celsus, the Roman jurist, who speaks about law as a form of art. Celsus, the Roman jurist, spoke about law law as oh my God, law as just and equitable art. Yes, law as just and equitable art. Celsius. We have also l'art comme droit, les droits fondamentaux à l'art, the fundamental right to art. And we have here a large discussion about the freedom of artistic expression, what is an artist, who is an artist, what is a work of art, very huge discussion. And finally, the fifth possibility of dialogue between law and art is l'art qui parle au droit sans parler du droit. The art that speaks to law without speak about law. And we have here a huge amount of romance, novels, drawings, etc., that could be used as a metaphor for law in order to enhance, to enlarge imagination, creativity, and innovation. For example, we have here, did you see this? In your team. This is a work of art. These three coccinelles, Volkswagen Beetle, from different years, different ages, they are completely commuted in three different cars by a Brazilian artist called Jarbas Lopes. This work of art called Troca-Troca, Changer-Changer, comme ça, plus ou moins, Troca-Troca, 2002, we can see here a kind of metaphor of the current dialogue between jurisdictions. We can see here a dialogue of the current role of international law in the international arena. Why? Because we have here three different models of coccinelle, three different ages of systems, but can dialogue among each other because they have a common principle. We can make a joke here and call this principle the coccinalité du droit international. Quelle serait la coccinalité du droit international contemporain? What would be the Beatlow-ness of the international law nowadays? This possibility to commute parts of the international law in the international law arena. To finalize, I would like just to call your attention that what I do during this confusing presentation today is basically draw your attention to three kinds of jurists, three kinds of legal professions. Professor, could you read please again?
Il y a trois sortes de juges, les artisans, véritables automates qui, n'utilisant que les mains, produisent des arrêts en série et en quantité industrielle, sans entrer à considérer ce qui touche à l'humain et à l'ordre social. Les acteurs qui utilisent les mains et le cerveau en se soumettant aux méthodes d'interprétation traditionnelles, qui les conduisent inévitablement à se contenter de transcrire la volonté du législateur, et les artistes qui, à l'aide des mains, de la tête et du cœur, ouvrent des horizons meilleurs aux citoyens, sans tourner le dos aux réalités et aux situations concrètes.
Donc, this is a quotation of a European Court of Justice judgment. Oh, judgment, no, opinion of the avocat général, Ruiz Harbo Colomer, and that says basically that we have three kinds of jurists, three kinds of legal professionals. I have to finish with this question. Quel genre de juriste voulez-vous devenir? Les juristes artisans, acteurs ou artistes? Merci beaucoup. I have to finish saying that most of this presentation is based on this chapter, my chapter called The Blindness of Justice, that you can download from the website free for charge in this QR code, in this book. See. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Merci beaucoup.